Hey everybody, what's happening? My name's Steven.
And I'm Spencer.
We work with Nexus Youth and Family Services here in Amador County, and we've partnered with Stanford University to bring you the Tobacco Prevention Toolkit that will cover the tobacco, e-cigarettes, and vape pens. It's going to be a multi-video series, and we're going to jump into it. And this first video is going to be about the brain.
So in this presentation, we're going to learn some background on the brain, we're going to discuss some of the unique features of the teenage brain, and we're going to talk about how drugs affect the brain.
In this section, though, we are going to cover some basic information about the brain. Specifically, though, how the brain communicates.
So our brains affect how we experience the world around us. It keeps our body functioning and also controls our behaviors. Some things our brain does without us thinking about it, like breathing, while other things we have more control over, like talking or singing. There's even a part of the brain that controls speech and another part that controls smell. Multiple areas of the brain are often working at the same time to help us engage in different behaviors. So for example, when we were walking, this involved using multiple areas of the brain, starting from making the decision to walk, to standing up, to taking the first step.
In order for our bodies to function, the different parts of our brains need to communicate with each other. The neuron is the primary signaling cell of the nervous system. The interaction between the billions of neurons in the nervous system is what allows our body to function and what allows us to think and to even move. The neuron is made up of a few parts. The soma, which is the powerhouse of the neuron, which is where the nucleus is housed. The soma then gives the rest of the cell the instructions on what it is supposed to do. Then the axon, it's the channel that carries information from the soma to the synapse, or the end of the neuron. The synapse is the part where the two neurons connect by sending chemical
I screwed up. Let me start the slide.
Alright. In order for our bodies to function, the different parts of our brains need to communicate with each other. The neuron is the primary signaling cell of the nervous system. The interaction between the billions of neurons in the nervous system is what allows our bodies to function and what allows us to think and to even move. The neuron is made up of a few parts. The soma, which is the powerhouse of the neuron, which is where the nucleus is housed. The soma gives the rest of the cell the instructions on what it's supposed to do. Then there's the axon, and this is the channel that carries the information from the soma to the synapse, or the end of the neuron. The synapse is the part where two neurons communicate by sending chemicals called neurotransmitters.
So in order for neurons to communicate, an electrical signal travels between the neurons. The signal starts from one neuron, travels through a space between the neurons called the synapse, and then connects to the next neuron. The part of the neuron that receives the signal is called the dendrite. The signal keeps going through connecting neurons. Another way to think about this is when you play the game telephone, by stringing soup cans together on a string. The message travels from one soup can to another through the string that connects them, allowing for communication between separate things.
These neurotransmitters are the chemical messengers used by the brain to communicate from one neuron to another. Neurotransmitters are released from one neuron into the synapse, or the space between the neurons, and bind to the receptors of the receiving neuron. This binding of the neurotransmitter to the receptor signals the neuron to take action. Each neurotransmitter communicates a different message and gives different instructions to the neuron that it binds to.
So the adolescent brain is a work in progress. Drugs can leave long-lasting effects on the brain, especially if you're a teenager. So next we're going to talk about what makes the teenage brain unique.
We want to dispel some myths first, and the teenage or adolescent brain is a work in progress in the best possible way. Your brain is doing a lot of growing and learning during your teenage years and continuing into adulthood. The structures in your brain are developing and adapting to all the things that are going on in your life. It's a great time to learn new skills and hobbies because those things can become more cemented in your brain for the rest of your life. However, risky behaviors like using drugs can also more strongly impact your brain during these years.
So our brains develop in a back-to-front fashion over our childhood and teenage years. Areas near the back of the brain which control things such as coordination and vision develop first. Areas in the middle of the brain, which is called the limbic system and controls our emotions, develops next. This system is usually well developed by the time we're teenagers. And during our teen years, the front part of our brain, which is called the prefrontal cortex, and we use that to help make decisions, is still continuing to develop. And in fact, it will continue to develop until we're about the age of 25.
So to put it as simply as possible, this is what's happening. During your teen years, your brain has a significant increase in synapses, the connections between the neurons in the brain. Your brain looks a lot like an LA freeway system. There are a lot of new connections and roads going anywhere.
And there's a lot of traffic. Your brain is experiencing a lot of stimuli right now. So in essence, the chemicals in your brain feel like they are in bumper-to-bumper traffic on the highway. And as such, while your brain functions well, sometimes there's a lot of traffic slowing down your information processing, but this is totally normal.
And as you start to get older, your brain starts to prune away some of these additional connections to help consolidate your learning. By the time you're in your early to mid-20s, your brain has reduced the number of synapses, or the freeways. Also during this time, your neurons are undergoing increased myelination. This involves forming a type of sheath or connecting channel or roads between the neurons. This allows for the processing of information, or the travel between the two places, to be smoother and more efficient.
And as such, you have less traffic and information tends to flow more smoothly.
There is so much growth and development happening during the teenage years, which is great in many, many ways. However, the brain is much more vulnerable to becoming addicted during this period of development. If we use drugs during our teen years, it not only impacts how the brain works in the moment, but it actually affects the development of our brain. This is why teenagers who smoke get more addicted more quickly than adults, and they're more likely to continue to be addicted to drugs when they become adults.
And this is important because, guys, the tobacco industry knows that teenagers are most vulnerable to getting addicted to drugs such as nicotine. And this is why they target you as an age group.
Next, we want to know or talk about how drugs affect the brain.
So in general, there are two main ways that drugs can affect the brain. Drugs can affect the brain by overstimulating a part of the brain, which is called the reward pathway. Or drugs can mimic our natural chemical messengers, which are called neurotransmitters, and overrun the neurons that normally use those neurotransmitters.
There are two neurotransmitters we will focus on. The first one you've probably heard of, and it's called dopamine. Dopamine is the neurotransmitter involved in the pathway of the brain called the reward pathway. We will discuss this pathway more on the next slide.
So the reward pathway is activated when you do things that make you feel good. You first release the neurotransmitter dopamine, which then activates this pathway in your brain. This pathway was developed evolutionarily to help us pursue activities that help us survive. At normal levels, this release of dopamine rewards the behaviors we need to survive, such as eating and sleeping, so we keep doing them.
Drugs like to hijack and take control of the reward pathway, so you no longer have control over it. Drugs cause 2 to 10 times the release of dopamine from this pathway, and it can occur almost immediately and last longer than the dopamine released from the survival activities. For example, when you use a cigarette, the nicotine of the cigarette causes dopamine to be released. This is why initially people feel good after using a cigarette. However, your brain continues to crave that dopamine release after you're done, and you slowly lose control of your choice to use cigarettes, especially since these drugs artificially release more dopamine than your body naturally does. This is how people become addicted to cigarettes.
Another important neurotransmitter is called acetylcholine. Nicotine mimics the structure of acetylcholine, which is a neurotransmitter in our body, and nicotine binds to wherever there are acetylcholine receptors in the brain. However, since nicotine isn't actually acetylcholine, it affects acetylcholine binding and prevents it from doing the job it is supposed to do in the brain. Your brain is a perfect target for nicotine because you already have receptors there that are really willing and ready to bind to nicotine because it thinks it is something different. Nicotine is taking advantage of the way your brain is already set up to manipulate it. So one way to think about this is termites coming into your house. Your home is a structure that is already built for you to live in. Termites come in, take advantage of this structure to build a place to live, which alters the original use for the house.
So first and foremost, we want to thank you for spending a few minutes with us as we've kind of covered this topic and this introduction into the e-cigarette tobacco prevention toolkit from Stanford University, as we cover e-cigarettes and vape pens as well. So if you need to get a hold of us or you'd like to discuss anything with us, please don't hesitate to give us a call. You can reach us at 209-257-1980. You can listen for my extension, you can listen for Stephen Hartman, or you can listen to Spencer Dutschke. Just give us a call. We'd love to answer any questions you might have, and we'd love to chat and hear from you.
And as always, guys, stay healthy and stay safe.